Hi, I'm Kevin Keller, the pragmatic statistician. In this episode of Street Stats, we're going to talk about the moving range chart in an SPC chart, or statistical process control, when our data is not expected to be stationary. Now, as I mentioned in a previous episode, the X moving range chart is an incredibly powerful tool that allows us to assess whether or not our mean or statistic of interest is stationary, and the most recent observation is statistically in or out of control. Now, the subtle side of this is that you might have a statistic of interest that higher is better or lower is better, but without redesigning the process, the statistic over time is stationary. So treat it as stationary. Today's episode is going to talk about when you have data that is not stationary on purpose. A great example is sales. The organization wants higher is better. And even if the marketplace doesn't buy more, it could be that sales are seasonal. Another example could be some sort of chemical process and measure, such as pH, concentration, temperature, where the value goes up and goes down over time. Now, if you plot these values on an X moving range chart, you get a mess statistically with the X chart, but there's gold for you in the moving range chart. So let's look at some data and figure that out. So we're going to go over to Engine Room, and I've got a variety of data that are based upon sales. And so we're going to go through 4 different examples with sales and see how the X moving range chart, or especially the moving range chart, can be highly beneficial. So we're going to pull up an X moving range chart, and we're going to plot the first set of data. So we have daily sales one, and we've got a time order, and then we're going to click through all the continue buttons, all the options typically are exactly what we want. And so we can see with this sales information that we were starting relatively high. We have a bunch of out of control points up here. Then we were in control, and then we were out of control. And that's a completely wrong interpretation of this X chart. The data is going to move. What we want to do is understand statistically, is that movement from point to point in control or out of control. And that's what the moving range chart tells us. It says that for this process, which winds itself up and down, and we call this autocorrelated data. If you remember that name, it won't even get you a prize in bar trivia. But when we have this sort of data, is the movement from one point to the next unusually large or small? And so we can see here that the moving range chart suggests that the movement from point to point is what we would expect it to do. So that's kind of cool. The moving range chart tells us this sort of motion is to be expected. So now let's change the process up a little bit. We're going to look at a second set of data. And so we have daily sales 2 and the index according to that. We're going to click continue through all these defaults. Typically, the defaults are exactly what we expect. So now, same set of data, but we added a new data point, and that data point fell off a cliff. The moving range chart will tell you that was unusual. That was a huge jump or a huge drop off in the data, and the moving range tells us something has happened. So now we have the opportunity statistically that says we should take some sort of investigative action. Is this expected? Maybe somebody took some competitive actions against us and our sales suffered because of that. Or maybe we messed up and we had lots of out of stocks. Could be anything, but you have to go investigate. All right. So let's look at another one. So we're going to add some more data to this. And let's see how this story unfolds. So now, turns out that there was some sort of competitive action. We were able to counter that and bring the sales back in line. And what the moving range chart will do is give you a signal of you get 2 points that are out of control, and you go, oh my word, we're out of control. That's a bad thing. No, it's a good thing. So we had a large dip and then a large spike. So when you see this signal of two out of control points together or relatively close together, it says the process has changed, and then hopefully it has returned, and the X chart confirms that it has indeed gone back to the way it was performing before. So the moving range chart is really the money chart for you if you have a process similar to this. So we're going to look at one more example, and we will plot daily sales number 4, and we've got an index associated with that. And we likely have a slightly different scenario here. And so where your teaching in SPC can lead you astray is on the moving range chart. We had one out of control point and everything else is back in control. That's actually a bad thing because now it says you have now achieved that new plateau and that's where you're living. So you can see here the points are all about the same. So this is an important point for you to understand on the moving range. This is a change in plateau, a permanent change in plateau. So hopefully that was helpful to you. In summary, when the data is not expected to be stationary over time, the moving range is an outstanding tool to use to monitor statistical control of a process that naturally drifts. So be careful out there. The streets are messy, and so is data. But remember, there is always a way.